of all, sometimes people takes a little bit longer to enter the room. It's a great pleasure to me to introduce Professor Julio Collado Vides. So, Julio, I was preparing the summary of the summary, and you can see there is a whole number of items. I'm going to just say a couple. So Julio is emeritus researcher at the National University of Mexico.
UNAM.
UNAM, exactly. He won the National Prize in Science and Art in 2011. He's the responsible for the Computational Genomics program of the UNAM. And then he has a number of posts beyond Mexico, including the senior visiting scientist at the CRG. And Julio's going to be with us for the next year. So please enjoy his presentation, keep in mind all the ideas, and if there is no time today, you can also write Julio and then discuss them.
Sure, yes, thank you very much, sir. All right. Yeah, I should put my email. It's Collado Julio, and then at gmail.com. So it's a pleasure for me to be back here and aceptar, ¿no? Ahí. Tengo que picarle aceptar. So today I will share with you some ideas, old and new ideas about the interface between language and genetics, and a little bit also connected with AI. It's a domain I've been working for a while. That was my mouse. Yeah. You know? Sorry. Yeah. So, I think language and biology, it's a dangerous territory because of several reasons. First of all, there's a lot of analogies or metaphors. We talk about the book of life, language of the genome, the language of genes. Language is a term just like love and democracy that is used in many different senses. I enjoyed, though, a while ago, discovering this short booklet of François Jacob, the Nobel Prize about where he proposes the nucleotides as equivalent to phonemes. But I don't know the English pronunciation of phoneme. Anyway, the elementary units of sound in natural language as the linguistic model in biology in the 70s. And I'll show you why that is not the case. Nucleotides are not equivalent to phonemes. Niels Jerne, in his Nobel lecture, gave a nice description, analogy between the almost infinite capacity of the immune system to generate, antibodies against almost any type of foreign molecule, with the huge capacity, of course, of natural language to generate many different sentences, right? So, and he has these nice graphs that you can see on the right of playing with sentences and then with the structure of the antibodies, right? Which are interesting, are attractive, but it's in my perspective, these are just analogies. Second, and most important, language is so close to us that we all feel like linguists. That we feel like we have, important things to say about language because, of course, we know about it. And I find it, quite common for educated people, colleagues, and so on, to consider language as a communication system, right, or device, which is true, but it's not just limited to that. As Chomsky said a while ago, language can be used to lie. We can use it in silence, right? We use it in silence, aware or not, but our brain is just, talking all the time, so to say, right? We can use it to hurt, to pray, to think, to whatever. And I think in general, we should be very careful because biology is a is a place where we love to identify a dominant function for every single, component of our anatomy. Of course, eyes are for the sake of seeing. So that's, I mean, there are very sort of strongly convincing examples of a function associated to an anatomical component. But nonetheless, the way I say is, now that we just saw the Olympic Games, all of this creative movement of the body was never a case of concern for evolution, right? There was never a pressure, as far as I know, of no natural selection to say, you must be a great, well, maybe I just exaggerate. I mean, these are always things open to discussion, but it's, I don't have the reference though of Richard Lewontin, who emphasizes this danger of, physics, astronomy, chemistry. They don't care about, they don't need to think about the function of the universe, right? And I think it's a good invitation to be more objective in biology, to stop thinking in that way. Oh, I have some in Spanish. And well, this is, yeah, I was going to move that sentence somewhere else, but for me, it's surprising. I don't know the details of the curriculum in Spain, but in Mexico, for me, it's amazing that, I mean, language as a component of biology is not studied, is not considered. And I, not even in graduate studies of biology. When I was in high school in the 70-something, I mean, I learned a little bit about the operon, which was discovered like maybe some few years before. And this knowledge that we have, that language is a component of biology, is been there for 30, 40 years or so. And anyway, another component of the danger is that there are many types of languages, right? The human or natural language, as we call it, the languages of computer science, the language defined in terms of the mathematical definition of within a definition of a grammar. And then we can talk about the language of more or less everything, right? Artists talk about the language of this specific artist, and language of birds, of dolphins. I mean, systems of communication, right? Plus, of course, there are technical uses, right, of terms of linguistics, like transcription and translation, since Greek and all those essential notions in molecular biology. Oops, ¿qué pasa? Yeah. So, I mean, it's not forbidden to, to make analogies or metaphors, but as cited again by Richard Lewontin of statement by Rosenbluth and Wiener, the price of metaphor is constant vigilance, awareness, right, of the benefits and the dangers of making analogies. This sentence of an image is worth 1,000 words, it's also partially true, but what is the cost in terms of precision, right? I mean, an image can say a lot, but it's not uncommon to, each one makes its own understanding on. So, I mean, it's clearly known that among the different human capacities of expression, language is the best instrument to share thoughts, right? I mean, we don't have philosophical treatise in drawings, no? We do have written text about deep thinking in the history of humanity. In terms of similarities, of what I consider real well-founded similarities, one is, again, Jacob, who mentioned that, remarked that the two major changes in evolution, the origin of life and the origin of language, each one corresponds to the emergence of a system of memory, right? DNA and our brain. And of course, they both share this aspect of being of discrete sequences, right? In linguistics, we are used to think about language as a continuity of discrete elements because we are used to writing. And nonetheless, the physical nature of phonemes is not such a discrete collection of elements, as I will show you a little bit later. So what is the nature of natural language? In biology, we don't have to worry about that. I mean, the nature of biology is the study of living things, right? Of living, and linguists have struggled through centuries of defining themselves. What is it that they are studying? Sorry, I'm a bit slow here. Yeah, it's not a social code of Rousseau, or it's since Saussure, it's most what is being talked. No, it's the speech, and it's not the written nature of language, which is the nature of language. Is not what academies of language say, but languages, but it's much more in terms of linguistic perspective. It's a biological capacity, and that means we can be naked and we can speak. We don't need any instrument to talk, right? In that sense, and it's of course related to our anatomy, brain anatomy, and our genetics. David Lightfoot has this beautiful book about the language lottery, in the sense of, you guys know, if you are a postdoc and you have a child in Japan or in wherever, your child will learn that language, right, easily, and will correct us. That's happened to me. There is this notion of a universal properties of the grammar of any natural language, right? Which, by the way, Esperanto doesn't satisfy. So on the other hand, language is not, if you think about whatever Catalan, the whole collection of text written in Catalan or in Spanish or whatever, I mean, that is an example of what language is, but it's not it's not comprehensive. I mean, language is there's always a new sentence that anybody can make. If you are a poet, or you're a crazy imagination of saying the famous sentence is green ideas sleep furiously by Chomsky in the 50s. No, we can say whatever. Pink elephants are floating in our heads when we wake up late, especially after having a nice drink. So, since von Humboldt, Wilhelm Humboldt, he makes a nice notion of saying, and in fact, it's being quoted that it comes from Spanish of the 17th century, of the universal philosophers of this region of Europe. The notion of something that makes infinite use of finite means, right? A finite collection of sentences or sounds, and with that collection, we can make infinite use. I mean, infinite in the sense that it's so huge that it's reasonable to consider it to be, infinite. So it's sort of equivalent to math, no? It's a discrete infinity, which is something unique to our species, by the way, no? This capacity of. So the question is, how if it is a capacity, how do we study? How can we capture? How do we model an infinite capacity? I mean, essentially, the way of working is we study a corpus, right? We have a corpus of a given language. We build a model, grammar, and then or a theory that is capable of generating a huge number, not only of the ones of the corpus that we use to think about the rules, but of course many new predictions, right? That's the basic idea, and I am here illustrating with a very, very simple model of rewriting rules, the one you have, no? So a grammar in computer science, no, defined by Chomsky again, is a quadruple formed by one arbitrary symbol S for the beginning of I have it O of Spanish oración, a sentence or whatever, an arbitrary initial symbol, a set of non-terminal symbols like noun phrase, verbal phrase, article, categories, right? Syntactic categories, and a set of terminal symbols, which are in this case the words, no? so, and a set, of course, of the production rules, which are rewriting rules, which are here described in graphical, but it's really, it can also be considered as rewriting rules of the form of a non-terminal that generates a terminal and, followed by a non-terminal. Now, as simple as you can see this one, I mean, we can take, this famous sentence by physicists that biology, we do just stamp collection, no? Because we don't have like a theory of principles from where to deduce the whole anatomy of biology or rules of evolution. Nonetheless, I mean, if you think of the component of the rewriting rules, that's the component that captures generalities, right? And then you go to the dictionary, and the dictionary is where you have all the idiosyncratic properties or unique properties, right? I will show you when I apply this type of thinking or model of methodology to gene regulation. That's precisely the way of playing with the grammar of gene regulation, where the words are transcription factors. Now, of course, generative grammar or universal grammar is complex enough that this just rewriting visual and dictionary is far from being sufficient. You have a much more collection of components of at the end is a theory of grammar, of universal grammar, with the case component and different components that help to restrict this nature of infinite, but nonetheless a set of with restrictions of which are syntactically correct sentences. We can always also make non-correct sentences. So it's this type of infinite, like the natural numbers, no? But we have an infinite number, but nonetheless 1.5 is not a member of the natural number. Something similar happens in linguistics, where we can have easily non-correct sentences that do not fit with syntactic rules when you fail to make the connection between singular of a noun and a corresponding verb. Now, going to this nice review of what he called enhancer grammars when I found that title, I was just very excited to see, let's see what these guys are doing. One thing is that it makes sense to me they talk about syntax in gene regulation, people that are studying on the details of the mechanisms of interaction of transcription factors and organization. So syntax refers to whenever you have the same components, but the order of them affects the final result of regulation, the spacing between the binding sites and the orientation of the molecules of the proteins that bind and will eventually induce or repress a given promoter, right? So so this review talks about the different grammars of different enhancers, and this shows you the very rich the complexity of the different binding transcription factors, their location in different enhancers or promoters in eukaryotes, but unfortunately, well, they describe the range of the possible models from the billboard, meaning absolutely no complexity. Every single element works by itself, like individual separated sort of bulks affecting transcription, and the enhancosome, which is the more highly detailed model of a particular anatomy of organization. And in the middle, they call dependency grammars. I went into searching into the literature and so on, but at the end, what is a little bit for me disappointing is that they talk about the grammars, but they are not predictive. So it's just, again, a sort of analogical description of the dream of being able to generate rules. We know that is not simple as, so that's a dependency grammar in linguistics, the idea of just connecting elements that semantically have a connection, but without any restriction in terms of the relative order. So as far as I've been, searching into understanding this type of approaches, there's no clear explanation of how you can use these methodologies to describe the organization of complex regulation in enhancers. So going back to my work of a while ago, I gathered regulatory elements of promoters again. So what you have here is a graph of aligned in terms of the transcription initiation site, the +1, of course, manually aligned, right? And the position of the different binding sites with the names of the different transcription factors in E. coli. So that's a much simpler piece of the biology. And so by then I gathered around 120 well-described regulated promoters. And based on those, we identify the major dominant rule that in the class of sigma 70 family of RNA polymerases, any promoter has to have a proximal site, a transcription factor that is between those two coordinates, +45 to -95, based on empirical data and on the fact that we know that the thing is that type of polymerase doesn't make a stable close complex. So it's always sort of breathing between like any chemical reaction reversibly going binding and non-binding. And that helps to explain if you happen to have a site that is too far, of course, because of the flexibility of DNA, it can eventually reach around the region of the promoter, of the polymerase, but then you will have to have two unlikely events to sort of coincide in time of the binding and the remote proximity of the bringing the remote. So that's sort of the physical understanding of why this type of promoters must have a proximal site that where the transcription factor binds to DNA, and whenever the polymerase goes and binds, it will activate or repress transcription. So that property is now modeled into a very simple rewriting, grammar, where basically the idea is you have an obligatory element, just like verb in a sentence, which is the promoter, right? There's no transcription without promoters. And then you have sort of negative phrases and positive phrases. That's the basic idea of this very simple model. And as I was saying, the dictionary, given the organization of the sites that I saw of some proteins that, like RGR, arginine repressor, always has two sites. Some of them, let's say, has only one binding site predominantly. So I decided to keep those variabilities at the level of the dictionary. And so the idea is you have the rewriting rules. Whenever you reach the non-terminal elements, you go to the dictionary, and if you think that this going and fishing for an element in dictionary, if you do that exhaustively, you will understand how a system as simple as this one can generate a very large collection of those that were used to build the model, plus many more predictions. So this one shows, as you saw, first the dictionary selects, in this case, the LAC-I repressor, and that encodes all the positions of proximal and remote positions of LAC-I in the then known promoters. And those remote positions are then, by transformational rules, moved to their correct relative position. Yes? What is LAC? LAC is the name of transcription factor of lactose. It's a protein that binds DNA. It's one of the first ones known in E. coli on gene regulation. Yeah. So for lactose, I for inducer. Okay, so from that model, we implemented a while ago in a prologue model. I just want to show you. We generate like 5,000 different novel predictions, right? That in principle are acceptable. So this type of approach we are now updating with 8 times more the number of known collections of 800 regulated promoters with evidence and so on in E. coli, and we are in our database, and we are rebuilding the model, and we want to use these huge predictions to fish out and predict high throughput data where you have a lot of start sites and you have a lot of on one side and then binding sites on the other, and you don't know which ones regulate which others. So that's the type of methodology of idea we are working now implementing. This is just to show you that when I was doing this modeling, you have to make decisions in the representation of, for instance, of the distance. So there are two ways of modeling the same object, right? Promoter and binding sites, where you can even either have the distance as something separate from the I mean, at the end, the most reasonable one is a matrix of a binding site that has the description of its function, activator or repressor, the TF, and the relative position, right? So yeah, and in linguistics, that is the type of description of phonemes. Phonemes are represented as matrices with properties of the sounds. Now, how come nucleotides are not phonemes? At least for the sake of because you have to be careful of when you say I'm building a grammar of what? Of gene regulation in this case. You can maybe build a grammar of genes, which will be a different collection of nucleotides, and you need to reconstruct the whole methodology from scratch. So in this case, I'm just talking about addressing the methodological requirements to use this type of methods to describe the combinatorial arrangement of regulatory elements upstream of gene regulation. And if you think of individual nucleotides as phonemes, a phoneme would be an equivalent class that wherever, so if you substitute a G for a C in one specific position, you can change the binding site from one TF to another, from CRP to FNR. But if you do the same nucleotide change in another position in the binding site where the only thing that matters is the distance, they will be irrelevant. So then you would need to fall into phoneme position dependent groupings, which is a little bit weird. Now, and the same type of argument holds for if you go from individual nucleotides to pairs of nucleotides or to whatever length, defined length of k-mers. So, I mean, my logical conclusion that's a while ago is that the minimal elements, right, to play with for a combinatorial game are the full sites for the binding sites, right? These are the smallest units that we can use to start playing the lottery of arrangements. And I mention all of this because to share with you the contrast with a recent, large language model approach that took the whole human genome. It's large enough to be used in a large language model. And so the first thing is they had to define the dictionary, and they went into k-mers of, it's a relatively recent paper. If you look, they identified k-mers of different lengths based on the notion of having a collection of k-mers such that the distribution of each of them will be more or less similar. There will be no extremes in, if you take whatever book of literature and you count the frequency of words, there will be some words that are extremely, at very high frequency. Articles, V, A, no, sort of irrelevant. Something equivalent to what Barabasi did in terms of the power law, network analysis of metabolism, and you see which are the molecules that are at the highest levels of expression, of frequency, water, and ATP, and things that are sort of irrelevant for the sake of. Anyway, based on that claim of that they want to identify those k-mers, that's how they build their dictionary, and then they show. So this was the construction of an LLM infrastructure with no specific aim in the construction, and then they show in that paper how they can now do fine-tuning of the model to precisely make specific predictions, like in this case that I'm showing you of promoter predictions in the human genome, and they show, you see on the graphs on the right in the blue the power of their own method that is better than other ones that are available. Now, I asked Anna Puech, who's the author of that paper, and it seems to, the way she describes in the paper, each time she makes a fine tuning, like in this case for promoter prediction, she needs to go to the data of experimental data of identification of which ones are promoters and which are not. So in that sense, I always thought about this perspective as there is no ab initio bioinformatics, in the sense that you cannot do biological interesting predictions from purely DNA sequence. she says that is feasible. And what I'm showing you on the right is precisely the different physical nature of the phonemes of the same phoneme T. When you pronounce it voiced or little voice on, and also, you know, we know that given the anatomy of our body, men, women, children have a different frequency and you know, tone of pronunciation. And nonetheless, although they are physically different, I mean, we have the brain to understand and capture what a phoneme is, no? So at least in terms of linguistics, there is no ab initio linguistics. I mean, they did try. The same happens in archaeology of natural language. You know, I mean, any archaeology lost language that's being deciphered, from the Egyptian to the Maya to whatever, it always has required a piece of known, so to speak, language around. So that's a consequence, a weird consequence, right? There must be, the language must be known to be deciphered. There must be a one-to-one correspondence document between like the Rosetta Stone or the Diego de Landa code of Maya, and also many other, I mean, the nice example is the sad example is Etruscan in the south of Italy, where there's a lot of tablets in clay with symbols that nobody knows what they say because there's no nearby language alive. So that's will be interesting to see because, you know, I mean, technology is so powerful that, I mean, problems that are considered theoretically incomplete can be solved in practice given the huge amount of data. So it's a little bit, it's always very dangerous to say this is in science to predict that something is not going to be able to be done. But so far, both in terms of linguistics and archaeology. Okay, so now I'm going to shift to a little bit different and sort of, we have time, right? This is more recent of the stuff that I've been doing. In fact, when we learn from the origin of human land. Archaeologists date its origin to 70 to 1,000, 1,000 years ago, right? And you can wonder how can they do that if, I mean, language leaves no fossil, right? Words are just go with the wind and disappear. So how can an archaeologist date the origin of natural language? Well, one strategy is to find evidence of quite complex activities that clearly show a cognitive ability that is to the level of our species, and that one is the use of fire for technological purposes. Fire per se, evidence shows that's been used by our species in 800,000 years ago, 790,000 years ago, for heating, for, you know, defense versus animals, for cooking, which is essential in our biological development because, you know, eating cooked food is much more easy to digest and therefore leaves much freedom, I mean, to energy for thinking or other stuff. I mean, maybe that's how cows are not so smart. And I make the joke, well, I don't know, it's dangerous to make jokes. But so if it, I mean, you know, I read a book about age and getting old and biology and, you know, and there's I need to get that reference that under extreme conditions, our body privileges our brain. So we can use 80% of our energy in the brain and sort of, you know, worry less about other components of our body. So I make the joke to friends, you know, if you feel too fat, just keep thinking. Think hard and me. Anyway, and the other evidence is finding symbolic objects. Now, what is a symbolic object? What do we think? What good can we call a symbolic object? Well, of course, those that represent, no, a symbolic, you know, like an art and a painting of something that is real, that is a symbolic representation of. But also, what is a definition that I find more interesting is that sometimes that is not produced for survival or for the economy of the caveman, right? I mean, you were there. I imagine our ancestors having to deal with major survival issues compared to our current, easy life. That is free from satisfying a necessity, that is born from basic, free from basic constraints. Now, if you think about this definition that I'm sort of filtering and extracting from those papers, the interesting thing is that this definition might be true irrespective of humans. There might be biological, natural components that are born free from basic necessities, and that's I'm going to go there. So symbolic subjects are like you see this. I need a figure to show of what is a symbolic. All the drawings that archaeologists. I mean, it's beautiful to see how science goes as thinking in the method, how you can argue and all the alternatives, and they can make even experiments of like in the fire of using and showing that that the claim is justified. So essentially, the origin of natural language is called a symbolic explosion because it opens, of course, a world of novel capacities, right? I mean, our language, it means the origin of language means the origin of our cognitive abilities. It's not only speaking, but other things associated with our symbolic processing, right? Emerged. And since then, I mean, the fossil record shows a large creativity and, of course, the beginning of the disaster of humans conquering the planet to the level that we are crazily living now. And the first ones have been found in Africa. Initially, they were found in Europe, so I take this as an opportunity to emphasize to my students that to understand nature, you need as much thinking and evidence as imagination. If you don't have imagination, it's sort of and we do have, as part of that cognitive explosion, the capacity to imagine, right? Which is something that is not existent in non-symbolic, as people claim. Our nearest one, Nardenthal, although I've seen papers that claim that Nardenthal was also using language, but anyway. Imagine the first time humans expressed language. By the time of, in Mexico, there was a comet, I don't know if you have seen here, that came, comes every 80,000 years. So last time that comet came, we already had the genetics, but we didn't spoke yet, which is interesting, because, well, wait. Because the last, and I don't have gone yet into that, understanding the evidence for the fact. I mean, they claim that the last genetic mutation in our species that sort of emerged, they gave origin to our biology, happened 200,000 years ago. So that means we spent between 200,000 and 130,000 years silent, which is weird. And nonetheless, with the same capacity. It's like walking, looking down and not, and that will. Okay, yeah. I thought I was going to have short time, so I don't show you these ones. Other pieces of the notion that, and this is of the notion that the origin of language is an exaptation, and not an adaptation. I don't know if you've seen this beautiful chapter by Leontine and Gould of the 80s called The Sprandels of the Cathedral of San Marcos, or of the San Marcos Cathedral. The idea is it's a really beautiful piece of literature worth reading that illustrates in architectural description the notion of an exaptation. So an exaptation is, and I will go to that description of the cathedral, but an exaptation is a mutation in evolution that, like for instance, the emergence of flying in birds. Birds come from dinosaurs, and dinosaurs had sort of proto feathers to, that were not used to fly, but for liberating heat. And eventually, birds, and there are some even dinosaurs that were able to fly. And the same is claimed to be the case of the origin of animal life on Earth, on solid Earth. Then there was animals in the oceans, and there was these tetrapods, or small salamanders with 4 pods, feet, or whatever, tetrapods, limbs. So the anatomy was there, and eventually they happened to discover the capacity to use them on Earth, right? So that's an exaptation, something that evolution generates, and that is not for the sake of solving an immediate problem. An adaptation is clearly explained as the opportunity of selecting a mutation that happens by random mutation, and that happens to solve the problem for the organism, for the species to survive, or to, right? In bacteria, it's very clear. A mutation that benefits will make it quicker to reproduce, and eventually that strange mutation will dominate and fitness, and will be present in a larger fraction of the population. No, so that's so an exaptation is if you think that really we have that same brain capabilities now as 200,000, 70,000 years ago, you have to ask yourself, how come evolution made a capacity then, when they were just fighting between whatever animals and fear and the cavemen of the Middle Stone Age, provided the capacity to be able to understand complex concepts as we are, with differential equations, with imaginary numbers, with whatever our brain is capable of the best poetry, or whatever things you consider to be sublime power of our nature. Why? That was absolutely sort of not really useful then, right? So that is one of the arguments for natural language to be an exaptation, which means, as these authors say, is that whenever we have these mutations, it's a capacity that the species has yet to discover the applications of its capacities, right, of its power. So that's why I think, teaching language, which is unique to our species, which is a biological anatomy, phenotype, just having legs and having, arms, we have language. And the fact that we can imagine that we have capacities that we have yet to discover, which are maybe urgently in need to be discovered to save our craziness of war and destruction and blah, blah. But that's another. So anyway, let's come back. So a symbolic object emerges free of basic restrictions and generates an explosion of novel capacity. Let's just take that concept as a symbolic property or a symbolic interaction. And now I go through to a piece of a text from Jacobin, Monod, and Changeux on the allosteric interactions, where I just kept, because the sentences are so beautifully, and Barbie, the question was how to explain that, for instance, that pathways are constructed in biology. So the pathway is a collection of reactions, right, of different enzymes, where you have, for instance, the synthesis of tryptophan. That starts with untranylate, and then, so that's A, that is modified into a different component B, a second enzyme takes B and transforms it to C, and eventually you get tryptophan. And the cell has the capacity, when there is tryptophan outside, to save the energy of synthesizing tryptophan and turning down those set of different genes in an operon. that synthesize tryptophan. Now, the question was for them to say, because these were the physicochemical models of the time of how, I mean, is tryptophan going to have direct competition with antranilate with the very first chemical component, right? To turn on the synthesis, and to the surprise of the discovery of by Monod, and I mean, allosteric interactions are indirect interactions, as shown in this very simple diagram, where you know very well that I mean the etymology, right? Allos, a different steric space, a different space that is being a transcription factor, like was discovered years later, like with hemoglobin. The allosteric metabolite that binds in a different location in the DNA, in the protein, in the transcription factor, or in the enzymes in the same story, different from the active site. In the case of transcription factors, active site is the DNA binding site, right? And as they were saying, if you've been able to read this, these allosteric interactions do not depend on the structure, on the reactivity between, if you have two chemical components that are going to interact in the same site, they must have some chemical relatedness, reactivity and similarity. And this is not the case of allosteric interactions. So, so the creation of and development of such networks of gene regulation would have been impossible if only direct interactions had been used, because they could have been limited by chemical structure, by the reactivity of the metabolites. So the invention of indirect interaction would have has freed molecular evolution from this limitation. And freedom is gained from otherwise insuperable chemical constraints. So it's an interaction that's born, it's liberated from the basic constraints, just like in human, the symbolic objects are emerged free from necessity of being functional or being useful for the economy. And in that sense, my conclusion is that given that definition, right, allosteric interactions are symbolic, right? And of course, they didn't like the idea. Jacob, in his Nobel lecture, mentions his friend Boris Magasanik, who said that this was the most decadent theory in biology, because it's so powerful, as they say. If that's the game of the rules, I mean, we can construct any type of physiology, right? Because we can connect any two. So it's a huge capacity, power in biology that is not, I mean, I mention it because there are similar statements in the study of language of saying it's so powerful that during different periods in time in the study of natural language, that people have said, anything can happen, any combination is possible, right? So that is the surprising conclusion for me, that allosteric interaction, and of course, I mean, it's being studied in the regulatory process, but there is also allosteric interactions in RNA molecules by the notion of life emerges with RNA, right? So the question is, what are the implications? And I finish with this one. So for me is that symbolic properties are, biology has symbolic properties from the origin of life. So it's like a single natural vector, because it's a natural concept of symbolic interactions that connects the origin of life to the origin of the highest capacity we can imagine of, the one of our cognitive abilities. So you can imagine that there is a list of a subsequent appearance of symbolic explosions, so to say, right? That has happened in evolution that could very well be used to evaluate biological complexity in a naturally founded concept, right? And of course, that is consistent with the grammatical approaches that we have and others have been doing for a while. And last is, well, that helps also to consider language, which is so, and cognitive abilities to be part of the natural world. I mean, there's no need of anything magic. I mean, that's well known, but anyway. And I think I finish here. So thank you very much. And I also, I also want to acknowledge, people in my lab that have, with whom I have had discussions and we're working on applying these things and so on.
Okay, so we have time for some questions, 2 or 3 questions.
That was a really excellent talk. Thanks. I have 2 questions. The first one is if do you think that language is a language in whatever form, not in human language, in whatever form, it's just a consequence of physics? Like, for example, in the origin of proteins, one of the recent theories is that, I mean, the first proteins emerged as a consequence of having polar and non-polar interactions with the first polymers, let's say. And this is already kind of a language because it depends on the laws of physics to have a solvent and things that can be distinguished in terms of polarity and non-polarity. And this would create the proto-language of proteins at the end. And then the second one is, at a higher level, if you think that language could be a sign of consciousness, and this would be deeper than just oral communication between humans or primates, and be something more general.
Well, your first question seems to me, you tell me, that you are sort of making an analogy of the origin of language and proteins as language or proto-language, you said. I don't know very well what a proto-language would be, but again, I mean, I would say yes, as an analogy, and we might use, language for proteins, but just being aware that it's an analogy.
To make it clarified, because the 2 questions are connected. So I think language emerges as a capacity, conscious or not, of having individual objects that interact, right? And then, because that's how we can communicate, we need to individualize an object to make a symbolic representation of it, and then we have interactions within the different objects that we can identify as individuals. I mean, because an object cannot be this and half of this board. It's a table. We need to be able to abstract a concept and an entity and to give it a name, a symbolic representation, and then how these different things interact. So in the physical world, as a theism that you have mentioned, I think the most elementary type of language would have been the primitive Earth when macromolecules started to appear and to interact among themselves. And then things evolved, entropy has decreased, and then we have the second stage of evolution, maybe as brain creation and the way to communicate to other individuals this language, symbolic language. So because you said humans, we are different, but for example, animals, they can communicate. Even there's this theory that trees can communicate. They can tell there's danger. There are people who are here and don't belong here. So it seems that eukaryotes or higher eukaryotes have the ability to communicate things. Maybe you say that is required for survival, something that needs not to be required for survival, but I don't know, maybe I'm making too complex numbers.
Yeah, I mean, the fundamental property of natural language, as opposed to other systems of communication that people in that area claim, is the capacity with a finite collection of elements to generate potentially an infinite collection of meaningful combinations of those elements, right? So in terms of macromolecules, of course, I mean, we do have elements like amino acids or nucleotides in terms of RNA, or in that sense, there are elementary elements and that combine and that can generate a collection of different potential, right? Proteins. So in that sense, I mean, the only thing is that, I mean, the interest of applying, I mean, why is it interesting to say that something is a language? In my perspective, one of the usefulness of that statement is that therefore we can use the methodologies that have been built through the years in the study of natural language for the sake of modeling the given object that the piece of nature we're talking about, right? That's one of the motivations. If the other one, if there's another motivation that is more, I mean, that's a different issue of the beauty of communication or whatever, right? So then the question is, I mean, I've seen grammatical models constructing virus sequences of viruses. But if we don't have a means independent of the theory that says, yes, this can be a viral sequence as this, and this cannot. But if any sequence is feasible, if any collection of nucleotides is an RNA or DNA, as it is the case, or if any amino acid is a protein, then what is the beauty of, what is the need of any model? Any combination is acceptable, and that is just maybe just physics, no? Now we are answering back their claim of collecting stamps. Well, it's only physics, no? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
now,
yeah.
Consciousness, that's a big issue, and I don't have enough, knowledge. And people claim that maybe AI, reproducing consciousness is more difficult than reproducing intelligence, or and then also the claim of maybe, I mean, there is awareness in animals and not only in us. So that's a very nice question that I don't know. Yeah, thanks.
I have a question because actually, as you said, language has different purposes. So one is a communication, and another is just intellectual transitions on the way old that we have of the value of the our reasoning, mental processes. So when you think this switch between communications and actually is a more complex stage, and we use language as a way of thinking, what's happened to humans? Because obviously, I think it's absurd thinking that 50,000 years ago, the brain capacity was absolutely the same as in modern people, I mean, civilization. I mean, the evolution is continuous projects, and the probably last 15,000, I don't know when, was a big jump of our IQ, I mean, the capacity of abstract thinking. So when this process, this transition from language as communication just to scream to make our about of tiger or whatever, and high primates also use and birds use this communication, and language as a way of thinking of the process, intellectual process.
Well, the claim from, I'm not a linguist, but I love reading those papers, and is that as a cognitive ability for thinking, language emerged 7,000 years ago, more or less. So around 7,000 years ago. Now, I don't think it's, you said something like it's absurd to think that the last mutation in our species happened 200,000 years ago. Well, it depends. I mean, evolution is not that, you just have to keep in mind that 2,000 years ago, for the sake of millions of years, it's just like, a second ago. I mean, you have to take awareness of the time scale of evolution, which is not, like Lenski's experiments in bacteria that make mutations every 3 days or whatever. Right? I mean, in our case, it's different. I mean, the speed of mutations that fits into the species. It's a whole area of evolutionary studies on the size of the population, and the frequency of reproduction, and blah blah blah. It's the whole piece of science of evolution, right? If
you're talking about the millions years, of course, but for instance, IQ's test shows that it's quite fast rising in the human populations of the last centuries. So it's obviously not genetics evolution, probably there are some different factors, social factors, whatever. But it's no fact that IQ is rising. for evolution, it's extremely fast. It's like artificial intelligence, the big jump in the last 10 years. It's like,
But we'll argue that here probably we are preferring to combine evolution as a natural process with cultural evolution, where we have different layers of evolution.
no, but I'm quite suspicious. I mean that the civilization, modern civilization, became something like probably 12,000 years ago. More or less, like agricultural civilization. But if 70,000 years ago, humans already had the capacity of abstract thinking and using language for abstract thinking. So what the hell they was doing for 50,000 years without creating a civilization?
They didn't, I don't know. Yeah, that's a good question. But you know, I have the counter argument. How can you, it's always been for me a mystery, how those, our ancestors, with a much more limited technology, were able to do things as the pyramids in Egypt. The Machu Picchu, you know, you see the stones, how fine they are, and how they
Yes,
managed to put
but
them over there. And
that's in the
all
last
this,
10,000 years.
yeah,
Civilization.
yeah, but the genetics is
But
the
our
same.
50,000.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's the thing of the claim of exactations, that capacity that we have to discover, right? And maybe even in the piece of fragment of life of one individual, we learn to think different ways through the years, and there are processes that take a lot of time, not like having this how you call it, emotional development in individuals moves like an elephant, very slowly. You know, you can understand what your the next level of so to say awareness might be, but it's a lot of work to. So it's like, I mean, my counter argument is like, you know, the fear of AI making us getting rid of all jobs, because jobs will be taken by AI. I say, okay, wonderful. Maybe there are new things, challenges for humanity, which are maybe as difficult as working, although it's not called working now, but it has to do with something else we have yet to discover. So
Making liberating or having the space for us with when you were introducing the anesthetic, you said that you were saying freeing space just to do something else. No? So
from basic restrictions, freeing us from basic restrictions, right? It's true.
Exactly. So you're within that direction. Let me close with a very simple question. When we were thinking about regulation and languages, in my mind came that perhaps we have a different level of evolution. We have prokaryotes, eukaryotes, and so on and so forth. Different regulatory programs, right? More complex, less complex. If we take languages, we can see that more complex and less complex languages or proto languages as a little bit a parallel understanding, right? From the very basic forms as we evolve and the modern eukaryotes, high animals, and then more complex languages. Is that a right assumption or a right analogy?
I don't know enough, Santiago, if about the notion of a proto language. If we ever had a proto language, I mean, I agree what they are saying, that we might have had, you know, in evolution before our cognitive abilities, the ability to shout and to advertise about danger and things like that. So if that is the proto language, yeah, that makes right. But what I like more to keep the notion of natural language as something that is, you know, unique and that corresponds to this emergence of our cognitive abilities, of imagination, of, as you said, intellectual abilities and all those capacities. So there are, and this is not unique in biology in terms of, you know, like flying. I mean, you can either fly, there's no proto flying. I mean, you cannot fly, you cannot semi-fly, you can jump maybe, but there's only, I mean, either you jump, no? It's like saying there's no, how you say, half pregnant. Pregnancy is you are or you are not, well, they are or they are not. But you cannot say it's half, they are half pregnant. So there are some concepts that, I mean, you have them or you don't, and that is not to be any problem in terms of natural science.
Flying started from planing actually, as far as I understand, because there is no such jumps. So probably some millions of small animals were jumping from the road. Someone survived and
So,
Yeah.
lemmings, no, as we say always from the road. No.
It's a textbook example in
Yeah.
evolution. Flying.
no, but I mean, I think we could be here for the next 3 hours, but.
Yeah,
we have
talking
to-
about the same.
to close here, so thank you very much for joining today.